Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Mirror World Mobile SDK JavaScript speedrun tutorial. So today we're going to be talking about auto-logging in your users. In a previous video, if you haven't watched it already, you'll probably find the link in the description below. We described how you can use the Mirror World SDK to essentially authenticate your users. We want to add one more step on top of that to improve the experience for them. Otherwise, every time they visit your dApp or open your mobile application, they have to keep logging in, which is typically not the experience that we want. So I'd like to describe to you first how the Mirror World authentication schema works, and then we'll write some code. But before we do it, I'd like to remind you to please comment, subscribe, ask any questions. We have a developer community, we have documentation resources. So if you feel stuck working on any of these things, feel free to reach out to us or in the communities. We'll be sure to help you out. All right. So first of all, the Mirror World authentication schema works like this. When a user logs in, we issue two tokens. The first token that we issue is the access token, which is commonly known as the JWT token. This is what identifies what this user is within our system and within your application. You can use that to find basic information about the user. The second token that we issue here is the refresh token. Now, the reason why you need to have these two tokens is because the refresh token can be used to refresh the user's authentication state on the client. So that essentially invalidates the previous JWT and then issues a new set of the access and refresh token. For security reasons, we do not expose the access token to the SDK or to the client so you can consume it. We do not expose it anywhere because it's just generally not safe to store on the front end. However, we do issue a refresh token that is safe to store on the front end. And so we can use this refresh token to then re-authenticate your user every time they log in to make the experience very, very smooth. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and write some code and then just showcase what we did. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to open our editor in here. As you can see, this is the front end from our last demo. As you can see, if you click the button, the user can log in. It works very nicely and smoothly. Yeah, this was really quick, and we can display the user's information. But as you can see, there's a problem. Once we refresh the page, I'm not logged in once again, right? So now it's a bit of a dilemma for the user. So now they have to, click the button and then they can log in again. Even though it's relatively fast, it's still not ideal typically. So what you want to do is now improve upon this experience. Thankfully, the Mirror World SDK has a way for handling this, and we might as well actually compose this into a React hook so you don't have to do this yourself. But here you go. If you go over to the JavaScript SDK documentation, and you can head on over to the authentication guide, we describe how you can perform a silent login. So here you can see we have the refresh token. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. There's a refresh token. Typically, this is what you're going to store on the client side, maybe in your local storage or in your session storage. And then we have the Mirror World SDK. We instantiate it, and there's a third option called the auto login credentials, in which you can pass the refresh token. And then you can add an event listener to then store the new token after the tokens have been refreshed. This will then make the experience very simple for your users. All right, so let's head on over back into our editor. So now that we're in our editor, we are now gonna take a look at our previous code. As you can see on the home page, this is a Next.js application. You're gonna find the link to the source code in the description below. There is our Mirror World instance, and then we have the user variable here and the login function, and then we have a button and everything is displayed in here. However, it does look a little bit messy, and maybe if you want to use the SDK in another component or somewhere else, this might be a bit of a challenge to deal with. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a hook where we can take this SDK, and we can also then use the hook to provide the login function and maybe also provide the user as a variable. I think it's a pretty decent thing we can go ahead and do. So I'm just going to go ahead and open I'm going to create a new hook in here. Let's create a new hook. Let's create a new file. Under hooks, let's call it use Mirror World. I think we'll use a TSX extension, maybe just because we are going to expose a component using context, so we can use the use Mirror World hook somewhere else. All right, so the first thing we want to do, let's first export our nice function in here. Export function, use Mirror World, and we would like for this function to return two things. The first thing we would like for it to return is to return the user object, to return user. We would like for it to return the Mirror World, variable as an instance, also a login function, right? And then we'll also need to define a provider component. So it's a const, let's call it Mirror World provider, and this would be a component that will have, say here, children, and because it's a React component, and we would type it like so, children with a type of React node, if I'm not mistaken, and that should return in here, that should return, let's just return a div for now, and let's pass the children in here. All right, cool. So let's see if we can export this function, export this component, and then consume it in our app, the TSX. And I'm gonna change this a little bit, and this will go in there, go in there, and then in here we shall have our Mirror World provider component, and this should do that. All right, cool. With any luck, everything should be displaying normally in here. If we head on over back to our browser, everything should still be the same. Perfect. Everything is just fine. Everything is just fine. All right, great. So let's head on back to our component here. First thing we want to do is create a context variable, so we can have the actual variables exposed to the user. So let's define context. So let's call it Mirror World context would be equal to create context, and in TypeScript, I think, because we want to type it, let's create some types so that it's a bit safe. So we'll then define in here, we can export it, interface Mirror World context, and for this we want to expose these variables that we defined in here. Right, it should be interface. Yeah, I forgot to see that. So we have the user, which would be the type of the user. We have Mirror World, which would be the type of the Mirror World class, I believe, right? And we also want to pass in a login function. This login function should be a promise that is, I believe, is void, right? I don't think it returns anything. And this is what we shall pass in here as the generic for this. So we can then pass in an empty object to begin with as this type. Okay, all right. Okay, expected type, but got 0 type arguments here, but got 1. I'm just gonna, oh yeah, this should be coming from React. I was wondering why it was misbehaving. All right, cool. All right, with any luck, this should be just great. So one thing we can do is, now we want to modify our component here such that this is the context.provider, and it expects a value, and this value should have the variables that we just defined in here. So before we use this, actually maybe, yeah, okay, I think this could just return Mirror World, I would say use context, and this would have the Mirror World context ideally. So this should still return. All right, perfect. That still returns our type. So we're yet to use it, right? So now let's define. Let's see if we can refactor our code. So let's go back in here in our index.tsx. So some variables that we'd like to take out from here. The first thing we'd like to take out is our login function as well as the Mirror World hooks. I'm just going to copy that and define that in here. And then I can see some problems in here. So one of which, because we would like to auto-log our user in. So to do that, we would like to have the auto-login credential passed in here, which, like I said, if it's being stored on the client side, then we have to read it from the browser. And if we're reading it from the browser, then because it's a Next.js app, we'll probably have to put it inside a use effect hook that will run on the client side. So for that to happen, we're going to define a use effect here, use effect. And in here, this should have 0 dependencies, and we'll try to see if we can get the value from there. So for now, let's define the name of the storage key. So that would be const, let's call it storage key. I like to use the storage key because it's just a lot simpler to reference when you're accessing variables. So let's call it our dapp, refresh token. So whenever the user logs in, we will use the storage key to store it in local storage. So I'll say here const here refresh token is equal to local storage dot get item. This will be a storage key. So if this storage key exists, we'll then create a new instance from the Mirror World. So I'll say const instance will be equal to new Mirror World, and in here we'd like to pass in, oh, we actually have it in here. I'm just going to steal all this and I'll just comment that out for now. Is equal to new Mirror World, and we would still like to pass in our refresh token. So the way we could do that is we could do a nice object spread. If the refresh token exists, then we would like to spread the auto login credentials in there with the refresh token. All right, so this will still create an instance. However, if we go back to our documentation, we see that we need to add an event listener. So this event listener, what it's going to do is it's going to wait for this event to happen. So this happens every time this credential is passed in. Whenever the auth refresh token event is emitted, it will then run the callback function. Inside the callback, we are going to save the new version of the token into local storage, and then we will fetch the new user object, and we could even console.log the user. So let's go ahead and do that. So we could say here instance dot on, and then actually we could just steal this code. All right, well, this would be instance. We called it instance, and there we go. We have our refresh token, and since we don't have this a function like this, we'll just go ahead and say local storage dot set item. Right, we're just gonna remove that and then call this set item, right? And then here we'll change this to instance.fetch user, and there we go. Here we could even try to log out our user object. Cool. Okay, I think TypeScript here is very adamant about this, so we'll just put an if statement in here. Say if there is a refresh token, then all right, perfect. This should log out the user. One last thing also I see in here is that we would like to put the user inside a variable and then store it inside this variable here. So I'm going to take this set user, say const user is equal to this, and we'll say here set user as this user. All right, with any luck this should give us the effect that we want. Oh, and also we haven't assigned the value of the Mirror World to this Mirror World. Oh, we haven't yet provided the value of Mirror World as well. So I think let's create a Mirror World variable. So let's say const Mirror World or Mirror World, and we will say here set Mirror World. Set Mirror World is equal to, I think this should be a lowercase w, just for consistency. Well, and we'll say here use state, and this should be the Mirror World class. All right, cool. And then we would like to set the Mirror World instance in here. So we can now say here set Mirror World to the instance. Perfect. This looks very nice. This looks really good. And yeah, I guess this should ideally work. This should technically work. So here in our provider, we need to give it a value, and inside our value we have an object here, and what I'm going to put in here, the first thing we're going to put is the Mirror World instance, which we already have. Oh, I think this should be an optional parameter, because at the time the component is loaded, it may not necessarily be there. So let's do that, and then we also have the user as well, and finally the login function as well. All right, there we go. We have our context provider that's working fine. Then we have a little squiggly error here from React that's telling us that TypeScript that's telling us this is possibly undefined. So in this case, what we will do is, if there is no mirror world, we'd like to throw a gentle error and just tell the user, hey, actually the SDK mirror world is not defined. And okay, all right, mirror world SDK is not initialized. Let's say initialized. Awesome. So then like this should still give us the functionality that we want. If we refresh the page, there we go. It looks like we're able to load the page. If I click login, I am able to log in the user. Oh, I just realized we hadn't actually I realized we hadn't actually imported the SDK. So let's head over back to our index.tsx, and we're going to delete all this, which we don't need, because we can consume it directly from the use mirror world hook. Okay, all right, so in here we're going to provide the user, and we're also going to provide the login function. All right, I think this is good. So all right, so there is one more thing that we need to add to actually store the user's refresh token. So whenever the user logs in, as you can see here, when you click the login button, and that should auto log me in. As you can see, the response from the API is, first you have the user object, and then you have the user's refresh token. So we need to store it on the client side to actually achieve this effect. So the first thing we're going to do is, now that we have the user's object here, we now need to actually store the refresh token. So I'm just going to go and copy this and paste this in here, and just refactor this to return result.refresh token, and voila. So if I go ahead and refresh the page, this should attempt to actually log the user in. Oh, I haven't logged in yet. So all right, perfect. And as you can see, if you head back into the application and try to check the local storage, now we have a DApp refresh token here. These were some older keys that I was using before, so please ignore them. I'm just going to go ahead and delete them. And right, so if I refresh the page, now it should auto log our user in. As you can see, we have this beautiful user object every time the user logs in. So it's very little work to do. So there is one more issue though that we haven't fixed, and you can see this in the network tab. As you can see, inside the use effect hook appears to be actually being called multiple times, because in React 18 there was a change that was added. So as you can see, we have refresh token, it gets called twice. So we can solve this a couple of ways. The first thing that we could try to do is extract all this logic into its own function, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a function called initialize, initialize, and I'm going to cut all this from here, and I'm going to paste it in here, and I will say initialized, right? But this still doesn't solve our problem. We need to actually define a variable that helps us track whether this component was already rendered or not. So to do that, we're going to say const is initialized. For this we'll use a ref is equal to use ref, and here we can set it to false. And all right, and whenever this function is called, we will then set this is initialized to false. Actually, I think this should run here. Let's do it in here. So what we would like to do is say if is initialized to current value, then we will invoke the initialize function, right? And then we will return a cleanup function in here, in which we will set the initialize to current here to true. So that way we don't have the double use effect that's giving us the effect that weird side effect that we didn't want to have. So let's go ahead and reload the page. Perfect. Right, so now its use effect is only being called once. Every time the user visits the page, it only fetches the refresh token once. It's very nice, it's very simple, it's very clean, and as you can see, as you refresh the page, the user gets logged in automatically. It's beautiful, and now you have auto login. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to like, to comment, and subscribe if you enjoy these videos, and I like to see what you build with the SDK. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.